If you combine the audience MCU tier list from Metacritic with the critics MCU tier list from Metacritic, how does that change the overall MCU tier list? This is How Stories Work with Jay Sherer, and today we are continuing our series on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. All right, here is the tier list. Now, if you're new to my tier list videos, the first thing you need to know is what are the tiers. Well, there are 5 tiers. It goes from outstanding, above average, average, below, and then all the way down to poor. Outstanding, above average, average, below average, poor. And there's some interesting things we're going to see today in regards to some of the categories. So let's jump into this, the MCU tier list for all of Metacritic, the audience ratings plus the critics ratings. We always go phase by phase, so we're going to start with phase 1. Now, if you're watching the video version of this, you can see that I've actually taken the 2 scores and normalized them into a third score. So I've combined the critic score with the audience score and then created a third score, which then allows us to rank these according to which tier that they fall in. Now, on all these videos, I start from outstanding and work our way down to poor. We start with the first movie ever in the MCU, Iron Man. Iron Man has a 3.37, and it is currently the highest ranked movie in the MCU in phase 1. In phase 1, the next highest movie is the movie that came at the end of phase 1, Avengers, the first ever collaboration movie basically in the MCU. That was a 2.65. Pretty big difference between those 2 scores. Iron Man's at the very top, almost making it into outstanding. Avengers is at the bottom, almost making it into average. In the average category, we've got Captain America, followed by The Incredible Hulk, followed by Thor. A little bit surprising to see Thor in the average category based on the ratings that we saw from the critics and the audience, but it also is good to see it there because I really liked the first original Thor. I think that movie has some things that are definitely going for it. We only have one movie in the below average category in this phase, and that is Iron Man 2. So let's go into phase 2. Now, if you're watching the video version of this, all the new movies now have a green outline on them, but I'm going to walk you through it just in case you're listening and not actually watching this on YouTube. In the outstanding category, we have our first movie that fits into the outstanding category according to the Metacritic's critics ratings and the Metacritic audience ratings. And that is Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians of the Galaxy has a 3.49, which moves it into the outstanding category. And then we have above average, which included Iron Man. We get a new addition, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, which is a 2.87. I kind of expected that to be a higher score, honestly, but it didn't quite achieve the highest heights that I thought it was going to. Followed by The Avengers. And then we go down into the average category. We have a new movie, Ant-Man, with a 2.37, followed by Captain America, the First Avenger. That's followed by Avengers Age of Ultron, which is followed by The Incredible Hulk, which is followed by Iron Man 3, new edition, still in the average category, which is followed by Thor. A little bit surprising to see Iron Man 3 above Thor, but there you go. In the below average category, we have Iron Man 2, which was already there, and then we're adding the lowest scored movie thus far, which is Thor. That has a 1.45. There are still no movies in the poor category, but we're going to go ahead and move on to phase 3. In phase 3, we're adding a bunch of new movies because phase 3 has the most movies, 11 movies in phase 3. The only movie that stays in the outstanding category is Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, this is really surprising to me because Guardians of the Galaxy is my favorite movie. So I'll talk about that more on the after show, about my surprise in seeing Guardians of the Galaxy that high. In the above average category, we add a lot of films, but none of the new films are better than Iron Man. So Iron Man is still at the top of the above average category, really flirting with the outstanding category there. That's followed by Black Panther, which has a much higher critic score than it does have an audience score, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the aftercast. That's followed by Endgame, which is followed by Civil War, both new editions, which is followed by The Winter Soldier, and then The Winter Soldier is followed by Thor Ragnarok with a 2.86. And there's not a whole lot of difference between Captain America, The Winter Soldier at 2.87, Thor Ragnarok at 2.86, and then the next movie on here, which is a new movie, Doctor Strange, with a 2.85. And then that's followed by Avengers Infinity War. I'm always shocked to see if Avengers Infinity War lower on these lists. It's still in the above average category, but it's surprising to me that it's so low in this category. That is followed by Spider-Man Homecoming with a 2.70, and then we have Avengers the first Avengers. And then we drop down to the average category. We're adding a couple of movies right off the bat to the average category. The first is Spider-Man Far From Home, and then Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. We already had Ant-Man in there, but we're now adding Ant-Man and the Wasp behind Ant-Man, followed by Captain America, the First Avenger, followed by Age of Ultron, followed by The Incredible Hulk, followed by Iron Man 3, followed by Thor, and then we drop into the below average category. Now, this is really, really, really surprising. If you would have asked me what the narrative was about what falls into this below average category, I think you would be surprised at how that narrative actually plays out in the data. So in the below average category, we have Iron Man 2, which we've had there for a while. We have Thor, which has been there for a while. And then we add the lowest scoring movie on this combined list. And quite frankly, it's barely above poor. The way this list works, there's fewer movies it's harder to make it into outstanding, and it's harder to make it into the poor categories. There's a smaller categories of ranges. And I did that on purpose because most of the time you see a bell curve. Well, that's true. Most of the time you see a bell curve with these films too. But Captain Marvel has a 0.68. So even if you add the critic scores, which you would think would be higher, and they are higher, but they're not so significantly higher that it outweighs the audience score and moves it up into average. Basically, what I'm saying is most people agree that Captain Marvel is not their favorite MCU film. I should also take a second to say and remind everybody, because I do this with all the MCU tier lists that I'm creating thus far, all are the MCU against itself. We're not comparing this to Citizen Kane. We're not comparing this to the DCEU. These are comparing the movies against each other, which means that Captain Marvel is relatively the worst film on this list, and Guardians of the Galaxy is relatively the best film on this list. It doesn't mean that Captain Marvel isn't better than some other movie. And it doesn't mean that Guardians of the Galaxy is worse or better than some other movie that isn't in the MCU. Let's go on to Phase 4. No movies make it into the outstanding category besides Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, as a fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, I can totally see why that's true because I love that film. But it is surprising that it is the only film in the outstanding category. That is followed by Iron Man, followed by Black Panther, followed by Endgame. Now we add a new film, and the new film we add is Spider-Man No Way Home. So one of the newer films is still really high, predominantly driven by the audience score on Metacritic, which is phenomenally high. After Spider-Man No Way Home comes Civil War, which is followed by The Winter Soldier, Thor Ragnarok, Doctor Strange, Avengers Infinity War, Spider-Man Homecoming, Avengers, and then we add our first new movie to the average tier. So that was above average. Now we're dropping into the average tier. In the average tier, we see Shang-Chi show up. It's at the top of the average tier, and it has a 2.46, which is sort of, flirting with above average, followed by Spider-Man Far From Home, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Ant-Man, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain America, The First Avenger, Age of Ultron, Black Widow, which is a new addition. That's followed by The Incredible Hulk, followed by Iron Man 3, followed by Thor. And then we drop into the below average category and we add a new film here as well. In the below average category, the highest rated film is Iron Man 2, followed by Thor, The Dark World, followed by Eternals, which is the new addition, is a 1.17. So compare that, it almost double the score of Captain Marvel, which comes in last place at a 0.68. So this is if you take the audience score and the critic score and you combine them. Now I'm going to talk about why I use Metacritic at the very end of this video, but a couple notes that I want to make before I jump over to the after show and start recording there. If you want that content, check it out on Patreon. 1.17 is a really, really low score, but still way above Captain Marvel. So we'll have to talk about why that exists. But also, it's kind of interesting to see where all of these movies filter out. And one of the reasons that, and in my spreadsheet I explain this, in my giant data spreadsheet, I'm using audience ratings and critics ratings to understand how people responded to these films. And then I'm going to break down all of the other storytelling techniques that are used in these films that probably made people like them more or like them less. So part of what we're trying to understand here is why didn't Captain Marvel do better? And why did Guardians of the Galaxy do so well? We want to understand what differences were being used. But we can't always remove subjectivity. So part of what is subjective to people in general is how they responded to the movie personally. And that's what we're taking the Metacritic's ratings for, to understand how people are completely subjectively responding to these films. If you like the MCU, if you like what I'm doing here, if you like storytelling in general, please click that like button for me. It helps more people be able to see the content on this channel. For more MCU tier lists and just more content in general about the MCU, check out my MCU playlist. That's here on YouTube. So when I create these tier lists relative to Metacritic data, why am I using Metacritic data and not Rottentomatoes data, which is another popular review site in this era of film rankings? Well, there's a very specific reason for that. The objective of Rotten Tomatoes is to tell you whether or not audiences and critics liked something. So if they liked it, you will probably like it. However, it does not give us a lot of data relative to how much someone liked it compared to something else. So if we're doing an MCU comparison list, Rotten Tomatoes only tells us if someone liked it or didn't like it. What we really want, which is what Metacritic provides us, which is how much did someone like it. When the collective critics rating, for example, for Black Panther is an 88, I believe, that is a lot of people giving it a very high score and very few people giving it a very low score. And you can go in and see what the critics rated it, and then you can average those, which is what Metacritic does, and it gives you the Metacritic rating. Well, the only thing Rotten Tomatoes is going to do is says, do people like it or do they not like it? So it's a more limited data set. So therefore, special shout out to Mike Rinaldi, who was telling me about this, and I totally agree with him. Metacritic is a superior rating service relative to the kind of information that we really want to get, especially when we're making MCU tier lists like this. Thanks for listening and or watching, and I will see you on the next show.